well, like, let's change this rule now, but also, like, set it up to fuck people with much less money who want to invest in a transformative asset in their IRAs.
And Michael, that happens everywhere in the world where the shifting definition of what an accredited investor means, and sometimes they call them qualified investors or whatever. So yeah, that's a thing that's not only happening in the US, it's going on pretty much everywhere.
Yeah,
so, yeah.
And if you read that bill too, it's they're adding that onto more, different, investments that you do. You do have to be an accredited investor to invest in certain things now. So they're widening the gap, basically, I guess.
Yeah, great comments. Thank you so much, Jim, Richard, and others on that. Yeah, I stand corrected on some of the stuff. I haven't read the bill yet. I'm just going based on recollection from folks who were reading the bill while we had the retirement account room last night on Cafe Bitcoin, and or those who said they did. And I left out the part that Jim had mentioned, so thank you for that. If there's nothing else on that, Jim, go.
No, I was going to say, yeah, no problem.
Great. I did want to welcome all the folks who are on stage with us. A lot of them we know very well from after spending hundreds of hours together with them on Clubhouse. It's been a lot of fun. But also, in particular, Lord Fusitwa, who's been in a bunch of our rooms. I'm sorry if I'm saying your name wrong, but he came at my request.
Thanks.
Great.
Good to be here.
We just call him
Great.
Lord.
Great to see you. Yeah, exactly.
Lord.
So we wanted to ask you if you could talk a little bit about the news that had happened in your country and how it relates to Bitcoin.
Yeah, thanks, Terrence. It's not really big news. It's just finally we've got the first node set up, so we can begin, which we've done in working through community centres in Auckland and Sydney. We haven't gotten to San Francisco and LA yet. Just letting the diaspora know that they have the option of sending remittances back through our first node. They can channel that liquidity back home while we work at helping them expand and set up nodes for themselves and continue our campaign back home in setting people up with wallets. So it's sort of the first tangible steps. Obviously, we haven't got access to Strike yet, so it's the first tangible steps in using Lightning to bypass Western Union and the remittance industry outlets to send remittances back home, taking advantage of Lightning's cross-border in a nanosecond for a tenth of a penny paradigm, which is life-changing for us. So I'm running the first node, so I'm learning a crash course in everything, and yeah, it's been really good. So first steps. It's a long journey, but it's got to begin with the first step somewhere. So at least we're off the ground.
Awesome. And have folks like Richard and maybe Miguel and others who know about PlebNet and Lightning, have they been able to help you?
Yeah, they've been awesome. So I'm in Lightning now, in PlebNet now, and Richard's given me edit privileges on PlebNet so I can begin a nation-state section following what's happening in El Salvador and sort of chronicling step-by-step our journey in real time so that it's there on PlebNet for other sort of decision makers to have access to who want to adopt Lightning. So they've been awesome, yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Great to hear. Congrats.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. Like I said, it's going to be a long journey, but it's got to begin with a first step somewhere. And the resources and assistance from PlebNet, I've spent the past couple of days working through charge LND, getting it running correctly, and that was done by sitting in PledNet and getting instructions step by step to get that working. So we've got policies on the channels to help to get our liquidity sorted in sort of a uniform pattern. So yeah, all those various technical steps are really being aided by the PledNet community.
Nice. Excellent.
Go Tonga.
Yeah, exactly. Go Tonga.
Hey, thanks, man.
So, I don't know, Lee, if you're clapping or you had something to add.
Just clapping.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so we'll move on, if that's okay, and see if anyone has any other news they'd like to share. We talked about price a little bit. Gensler, the IRA proposed House language. Lesky.
Yeah, Terrence, have we talked about an update from Powell? And,
yes. No, please do that.
Yeah. I can sort of give a quick summary. Okay, so a couple of things from the Fed. Looks like they may begin tapering sometime in November 4th, and they plan to complete the taper within 7 months, which is kind of seems to be a pretty fast time frame. It may signal potentially more upside towards inflationary risks. Okay, let's see. They're not expecting to raise the rates prior to taper complete. So I think it was one of the questions that came up during that update. They did mention that they don't expect a lot of exposure to the Evergrande crisis on the U.S. market, and there was some reference to sort of quote-unquote crypto. So they did mention that they're planning to release a new settlement system for like instant settlements. Mm-hmm. And they said that they believe that it's important with respect to the CBDCs, it's important to be right then fast. So I think that's just a quick summary. Right.
Excellent. Yeah, that's great. Does anyone have comments or questions about that? Okay, I'm going to go back to a couple audience questions. People have been direct messaging me, and other mods, feel free to chime in, please, and speakers. Do you think Bitcoin will go up? What's the platform to use for investing in stocks? Anyone want to?
Pretty broad question. I don't know that I have an answer directly for it, but something that might loosely correlate is some new developments with Robinhood, which I'm personally not a user, but not sure if you guys had seen that they have finally started to move into the kind of crypto hot wallet side of that. So interesting, at least in just the general news of Robinhood, so slowly but surely, right, kind of as Nesky was saying at the tail end of his comment, getting things right and then expanding from there. They're starting with some select clients, just kind of a news on that side of things, but ultimately those wallets allowing people actually now for the first time to actually withdraw their funds from their holdings is kind of an interesting thing. So that came to mind just simply because the question was broad, touching Bitcoin and stocks. So not that I recommend it. Technically, I guess that could be a place now. Okay, at least mentioning it, considering they're going to start allowing people to actually withdraw. Prior to that, you were not able to do that, which is something most anyone would, advise against if you can't actually own your own Bitcoin. But anyway, I figured I'd share that for what.
So I want to chime in on this. I've seen the articles on this, and I don't think that Robinhood should be hailed as doing something like innovative or heroic. It's like, the hostage taker releasing the hostages is the outcome you want. Like, cart out the keys to the city for them, and that's how I feel about Robinhood. Being able to self-custody your Bitcoin is industry standard. And they are way late to this party, which means they're capitulating. They've been forced to by market competition. This isn't something they naturally would have done left to their own devices. And I can say that, in my opinion, because they haven't. right? It's not like there's some huge technical challenge that they were sitting on. Or if I were to rewrite the article titles, it's either, that whole hostage taking thing, or Robinhood in the background secures enough Bitcoin that they now feel comfortable that if they give you, a custodial wallet access, that it won't create like a run on their holdings, right? Because I question whether they were even holding the amount of Bitcoin that they were letting people buy, because when you don't let people custody your Bitcoin, then you can do that with the IOUs that they're holding in their accounts. You can rehypothecate Bitcoin. And then additionally, finally, why I'm also, I don't recommend Robinhood for any type of investing, because you'll get on there and there'll be pressure to buy stocks. The thing about Robinhood that differs from all the other players, your Schwabs and Fidelities of the world, everybody is offering zero free trading. Everybody is offering fractional share stock buying. But what Robinhood does not allow, and what other players that are similar to them like Webull do not allow, is for you to assign a beneficiary. So in the case of your, accidental death or incapacitation, what happens in Robinhood, and they let you is a beneficiary, but that is not a beneficiary. So if something were to happen to you, the people close to you would have to lawyer up and go begin negotiations. Your estate would have to begin negotiations with Robinhood. So the assets that you have on that platform fall into a black hole the moment something happens to you. Robinhood is robbing the hood. Don't use their service. They suck.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. There is zero reason to purchase Bitcoin on Robinhood. With this,
to purchase
the fact that they've been late, allowing people to transfer their Bitcoin out to cold storage shows that they do not understand the asset and they don't really care. And the other thing is that it's just, I think there is also zero reason to use Robinhood for anything else because of the fiasco early in the year with the GameStop stuff.
The one use case I have for them is I use them as a shielded debit account, and any money there earns a little bit of interest. Like nothing you're doing really earns interest. So if you want a debit account that you're going to use for something that you have to load up, so that if anything happens to that account, they can only so much money is at risk. They're useful for that. But other than that. Right. And the only reason I'm doing that is because I was previously a Robinhood user before I figured out that they hate their customers.
Okay. All right. So I think we've said enough about Robinhood. Again, there is zero reason to purchase Bitcoin on Robinhood. Okay, my suggestion is to move to a different topic.
For the record, and for the record, bringing it up simply as a point, Michael, I'm in agreement with you. And I think the release of the hostages is at very minimum a step in the right direction. But I'm also not a fan, and that's kind of why I led with that disclaimer. But we can definitely move along from there. But I appreciate all you guys had.
Hey, Terrence.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just saying, if we're changing subjects, I have a question. What was the reception on this Machine Greens, that documentary that came out from Swan this week?
I was actually going to mention that as something that people really should go watch. It's a wonderful short film. It's just only over 30 minutes, probably about 38 minutes, something like that. Super short, incredibly compelling. Just came out less than a week ago. Released by Swan, I believe. Terrence can confirm, or supported by Swan at least. And I think it's something that can be really easily shared with, friends and family and anyone who expresses a concern in energy used by Bitcoin. It's incredibly accessible, very compelling, very to the point. Highly recommend.
Yeah, so Swan was very happy with the reception. We did the distribution and marketing and promotion, but we did not otherwise have a direct relationship with the film. Obviously, a bunch of us watched it. It's great.
I think Brad was one of the producers. I think he was listed as.
That's true. Brad Mills is a producer and early investor, maybe one of the very first investors in the film. I'm not sure he's affiliated with Swan. He's obviously a great Bitcoiner in a lot of our rooms, and a leader in Cafe Bitcoin, which was started by Corey, the Swan CEO and co-founder. So he's one of the people who can open up rooms, I believe, in Cafe Bitcoin.
And the producer, Jimmy King, is also doing a bigger documentary that might have multiple parts. It's called We Trust, and it dives in more deeply into Bitcoin. And they're also fundraising for that. So if anyone really enjoyed that movie, this one's going to be, I think, a higher quality production, like a bigger film. So just throwing that out there.
That's great, Mags. What was that called again? One more time.
I believe it's called Trust. Let me just double check from in our chat that I had with him. But I'll let you know if it's different.
Awesome.
Yeah. I will say that I wish the name was a little different. I find the name to be a little counterintuitive. Green Machine or Trust? Green Machine.
It's just harder to remember.
I think it's a play on something else. The War Machine. Was there something called the War Machine, like a documentary? Yeah, it's clever for sure, but it takes a second to connect the dots on why it's called that. It doesn't resonate immediately.
I think the actual title of the film is This Machine Greens, and I think it's trying to insinuate that Bitcoin is the machine that is greening the earth. It's a benefit for the earth. I do agree, though, that the title is wordy. Really great film, and from my understanding, Mags, that documentary Trust, something along the lines of that is going to be monetary policy in Bitcoin, not necessarily energy.
Yes, it's more. Yes, exactly. Diving into Bitcoin more deeply.
Is there an expectation on when we?
For the next film, Travis?
Yeah, just curious. Is it like slated for like early next year?
Yeah, they're doing like the money side of things and trying to work out. Probably, I would assume probably 2 years, maybe quicker if they put it together. But I know it's a bigger production. I think that it was a few $1 million production. The next one, or at least over one, from what I've heard.
Cool. Thanks, Teddy.
Yeah, so their I'm just have a fee file open. So their budget is $425,000. They've raised $150,000, and some of the confirmed participants are Alan Farrington, Meltem, Amir Taki, Nick Carter, Brandon Quindam, and Samson Mao. This could be a bit older, but what I was given. There is a Trust trailer available. And it really does, you're right, it focuses kind of like, after the 2008 banking crisis, then unprecedented money printing, and just quickly skimming through. So it's really focusing on, like, Bitcoin coming out, quietly proving itself, and how it's spread, whether it's Wall Street billionaires and, like, cultural icons. So they're really looking at two timelines: the decline of trust in the U.S. dollar standard and the rise of a trustless monetary standard, and diving into that.
Yeah, and thank you for that. That was awesome. So I appreciate it. I do want to go back to Green Machine because I left out the fact that Swan Bitcoin, specifically Corey, did help the filmmakers get access to Lynn Alden, who's one of the top, in my opinion, top macroeconomists who thinks about Bitcoin and altcoins, and is phenomenal. And she also has a great essay on why Bitcoin's energy usage isn't a problem. That's 48 pages. That's on the swanbitcoin.com website. If you email me, my email's in my profile bio. I'll send that to you as well if you can't find it on our website.
I kind of wanted to bring up something along those same lines and see if anybody got a chance to read through Bitcoin Net Zero, the paper that Nick Carter and Russ Stevens did for NYDIG, and just get people's thoughts on it. I mean, I'll be honest, I haven't gotten through all 70-some pages of it, but just the first half of it, I think that they did a good job. It's long. It's very long. But the first part that I read, I thought it was good that, they kind of, it wasn't all about the ESG stuff. It kind of went into Bitcoin and I guess the social impacts and the kind of good that it can do. Yeah, I guess that is the S. But no, from what I've read, I like it so far. Has anybody gotten through it, and does anyone have any thoughts?
I've read through a good amount of it. I haven't dove into the actual low carbon transition scenarios, and that is something that I used to work on before I joined or went down the rabbit hole. Like, I used to model out low carbon transition economic outcomes and different kinds of clean tech. So I did see that, they hit on a couple of the clean tech that are feasible, so I agree with that. I think what people are having a bit of trouble reconciling is the assumptions around price and also the assumptions around how much energy use the network will expend. It's something contentious among some of those that have read it. And honestly, it's one of those things where the further out you go, timeline-wise, the less likely it's, or the more uncertainty there is. So it all comes down to, here are my assumptions, and do you agree or do you disagree with them? So I think, again, I haven't dove into those assumptions yet, so I can't comment. I just know that those are two things kind of that have received a bit of contention, but overall, I do think it's an important additional document and data set. And the IEA did look into something similar a few months back, and they do acknowledge this study, same thing, low carbon Bitcoin scenarios.
That's excellent, Max. Thank you. And great question.
And I had heard Nick Carter speak on I was on call-in, I believe, but he said that when they were doing that, they did try to make like the most conservative assumptions possible, like a kind of a worst case scenario when it comes to energy uses, as far as there being no real innovations of conserving or getting better sources of power off grid, green energy. So hopefully, it'll help out kind of when we face that FUD and those arguments in the future.
Yeah, the price predictions, the most aggressive scenario was at something like $450,000 tops by 2027, which of course I think most of us would probably not consider to be extremely aggressive. But I could see that perhaps if they're catering to an audience that, is not going to just outright dismiss this report as coming from lunatics, perhaps that is a reasonable assumption to communicate to people as being somewhat, practical and somewhat realistic. I did chuckle when I saw that, though.
So Ross Stevens.
Go ahead.
So Ross Stevens is bearish on Bitcoin, right?
But back to your first comment around the whole social being presented, I do think that's maybe a strategy that I'm seeing taken up a little more strongly, especially once you start talking about increasing the amount of energy used. It's the kind of reframing it as, as a civilization, we benefit from all these different technologies, that's aviation, the internet, heating, cooling, and this is just something else that betters it, and here's all the countries, and here's the impact. I do think it's probably a better way of deflecting the right word versus just like, oh yeah, but it's green. You kind of, maybe it's addressing it head on, and maybe this approach will actually work. So I always like to be a little bit more optimistic than not. So hopefully this will be better received than, oh, but don't worry, it's green.
I think it's an interesting concept, but I question whether it will work because I think there are, and I do question kind of why it matters, but I think it's always good. We need to be driving a conversation and engagement forward. I think the problem is that we're dealing with a lot of people who fundamentally don't see the value in using energy for what Bitcoin provides, right? And so whenever you're dealing with people who are moralizing the use of energy, that's essentially what they're saying, right? So we can use energy to, to make bombs and aircraft because they assign value to those terribly destructive things. We can use energy to run YouTube, Netflix, and washing machines because they assign energy to those things. But we shouldn't be using energy for Bitcoin because they either don't assign value to it or they see that their, artificially entrenched positions are threatened by the use of energy on Bitcoin. So it's not really. I think oftentimes it falls into not being really a good faith dialogue, unfortunately.
Yeah, people don't question energy use on stuff that they're already using or supporting, right? And I think as adoption goes up, a lot of this narrative probably will be, either tamped down or perhaps wiped out, because nobody ever asks is banking green, ATM machines green, credit cards green? Nobody asked that. So I think it's a matter of adoption.
This is an argument that This Machine Greens, the documentary that we were just discussing, covers really well.
I have a question on a derivative of this, like a new flavor of the energy FUD is. So there was an article that came out, I think this week in the Guardian, about the quote unquote waste of the actual hardware. And I don't know how accurate that is. Yeah, so I'm wondering if anyone's like any of the quote allies in the space have written an article refuting this kind of thing already. If that I can kind of just go read.
Potentially Nick, because he's like, he mentioned today again, he's gonna go. He's like, gotta write another thing. So I wouldn't be surprised if he says something. But the biggest issue that I think a lot of us miners have had with that is that some of the assumptions are really off. Like they're assuming equipment is like
just
1 year
trash, right?
used, and that's it. And then it goes into the trash. Well, no, I'm sorry, I'm still mining on my F9.
Right.
They're like 5 years old, and probably will still be profitable to continue mining. And miners are thinking too that like the equipment timelines kind of because are going to be extending for equipment. So like maybe the S19 might actually be good for 7 years now, because in terms of the percentage hash rate output for each generation, it's decreasing kind of on a log scale. So before, like, it would make a huge impact between 2 iterations, and now it's not as big of an impact. Obviously there's an impact, but it just means that you can continue using your old machines a little bit longer.
Sure. I think that most of us have those assumptions. I'm just wondering if anyone has like obviously people point to something like that. I'd love to point them to something that argues against it.
So I haven't seen anything down in the weeds. Maybe someone else can address that. But I did want to say I had a room last night in Cafe Bitcoin, which you should all join. Not just the Bitcoin Club. So you can join this club or Cafe Bitcoin by clicking on the top left above my head and join the Bitcoin Club. Shelly.
Okay. For them to join the clubs.
Yes, please join the clubs, and you'll see Shelly in both of them all the time. She's great. As is Neil. They're like the 2 stalwarts, I would say, for mods. Anyway, so in the Reframe the Bitcoin Energy debate that I had with my close friend from real life, Damian Donnelly, who's not on Clubhouse too much, we were debating him, several of us, his view that we should reframe the energy debate around like polluters are not really paying the price. So whether you think windmills and solar panels are created with lithium products and are not recycled, right? Maybe that should be taxed more. Maybe carbon should be taxed, whatever. But there are ways to sort of do free market regulation where you reduce the negative externalities or tax it so that people pay the price, for example, for using coal, which is arguably not clean. So if the people agree that the experts and the people, and after debate, they decide that coal is not clean, then coal will be taxed, right? But people can still use coal, they'll just use less of it. But it puts all the energy sources at an even level. And I'd love to hear what Nags or others think of this. But the whole idea, I'm sure you have a lot to say. But the whole idea is that you want to debate the negative externalities that each of these energy sources have, and maybe the way consumers use the energy. Like if you're mowing your lawn with gasoline or diesel that can cause a lot of byproducts that make the neighborhood smell and pollute the air in your region. So maybe people will want to tax that. But the idea being that this is a much bigger debate than just Bitcoin mining and getting into the nitty gritty. It was like, oh, we're actually green, or we actually don't, our carbon footprint is actually lower than cruise ships, and all these things, that those are maybe not the right approach. So it's just an idea. I wanted to hear what Mags and others.
No, I agree with you, and we're starting to see that kind of pricing more and more. I don't know if the U.S. has this, but in Canada, not only do we have like little taxes on bottles, but also electronics equipment for like a recycling fee, like a TV that pays $40. It's not a lot, and that's the big issue. Same thing with carbon taxes. We keep moving the goalposts on our climate change targets because governments have not been aggressive enough. And I know there's some of you folks, probably many Bitcoiners, that think, oh, we shouldn't even have carbon pricing, let the market decide, etc. That's not the point. It's the approach has failed because governments don't price the externality like by market. So because typically it's stakeholders like citizens, they're like, oh, I can't afford a TV. I'm paying a $300, like recycling fee on a $400 TV. Like that's the issue. Like, low income consumers or businesses, they're like, hey, you guys are going to kill my business. I can't pay for this. And that's traditionally why things like pricing has not been accurate. Carbon trading failed in Europe when it was first implemented because they were just way too cheap. It affected no change. So I know it's kind of maybe a controversial take, but the whole point is you have to price it right. So it's potentially, yes, maybe, but then you have to kind of ask yourself, what is the appropriate amount? And the other thing too that Bitcoiners do raise often that might actually, align with this is like, they look at coal versus natural gas versus turbines, and it's like, how do you determine what is green? And there are different ways to estimate it, and one of those things is life cycle costs, including the amount of energy used for the production of things like metal turbines and batteries, or like what are we measuring? Is it kind of the environmental impact of extraction? Is it the waste generated, the water used? So it's very complicated, right? That's the main idea.
Thank you, Max. Yes, I had heard that it was. Oh, by the way, Leslie Klein, I keep trying to bring you up. I don't know if. We'll see if we can get you up here. Sorry about that.
I have a follow-up question, Terrence, from Matt.
Yeah, go.
Just again, trying to understand that. Are you saying, or what I caught was that the carbon credit system is broken? Is that right?
It's not. I'm not sure if broken is the right way. It's supposed to incent change, but the prices at which carbon credits have historically been priced at weren't enough to influence shifting off carbon fuels, regardless of if you think a short carbon price should be there. The whole point of a carbon system was to influence some sort of impact, as in shift away from carbon to renewables. But because if they're not priced kind of at the appropriate amount, and as in more, that change hasn't really, it's been so gradual. And so what's happened is, like the goalposts for carbon targets of like, I remember Kyoto originally, it was like 2030. Then we moved to 2050, and now countries are looking at 2060. So the whole point is like, there hasn't been enough money flowing into the system or ways to capture this externality. And that's why I think though Bitcoin is pretty cool, because the market is actually starting to take care of it on its own. So we are looking at reusing waste, whether that's waste resources or waste energy. Resources being things like tires, burning them, or waste fuels, flare gas, cow poop, etc. Like we are starting to use those resources because it makes economic sense. Plus, we're co-locating with renewables, providing a consistent revenue stream, so that places where transmission constrained. You guys all many of you know this, if not, watch the documentary. But the point is, we are actually using market incentives this time to enhance the use of low carbon tech, or provide kind of that very needed investment to shift to this low carbon economy. And I think that's kind of what Bitcoiners are about, is a market-based incentive. And we're doing it because it makes economic sense as miners.
Thank you. And the shifting goalpost part, that's, a pattern that's being repeated, isn't it? So pretty worrying.
It's because people want to get voted back in. That's all it comes down to. Politicians that raise taxes aren't very popular.
Exactly. Like I remember Senator Jim Tester from Montana. This was years ago. He was talking about, the industry. And, when you're from a small state, you're going to get a lot of donations from industry on the right and the left, but often on the right. And anyway, so he was being lobbied and promoting kind of a carbon tax. As he said, the law should be clear. And to Mag's point, to date, I've read this elsewhere too, the taxes have been too low on carbon if you believe in climate change, which is a whole nother issue. But let's just assume there is some pollution that is bad or some negative externalities from pollution. And you can define pollution broadly to include lithium that's used in solar panels and windmills, and all the birds that are destroyed by windmills, and all the lack of recycling of used windmills. But anyway, it made me think that, because how independent can you be being a senator from a small state, or a state with not a lot of people? Made me think that one reason industry wanted it, obviously the clarity in the law is very important, but also maybe they felt that they could have a lower tax than other things where they would face regulation just directed at their industry, where they get heavily punished for gas or natural gas or oil or what.
And I'll say one thing to that. There is a truth to that. So I work with heavy industry, steel, cement, all the big heavy manufacturers, energy intense, trade exposed from a carbon system. And honestly, they were at the end of it all, they're like, put in the regs and get out of the way. Like, put in the regs so we have certainty. Don't keep changing them. Know what system you're coming in, and we will work around it. They hire specific financialization guys that hedge against carbon pricing. They figure out what investments to make, but they need that certainty. And usually, for example, Ford came into Ontario, they got rid of the cap and trade system, which companies have been preparing for decades. And that's not great policy because it's uncertainty. So, a part of it is, sure, maybe some are against cap and trade, but it really comes down to just, we need to know what investments we need to make, what are going to be our costs, and then we can plan for it.
That's awesome. Thank you again, Max. Okay, I think we'll move on. I don't know if Donna, welcome to the stage. If you're not following Donna Riddell, please consider following her. She's a professor of blockchain and crypto and digital assets, and is very plugged into what's going on the regulatory side as a former chairman of COMEX and managing director of the World Economic Forum. Donna, I don't know if you're there.
I am. I think I joined late, so I'm just picking up, of course, on what Mags is talking about in terms of the energy, and of course it's super important to dispel some of the notions, especially that get thrown around by Senator Warren and the boiling waters. And I don't know if Amanda's here, but I think that there are people. We've been chatting with a friend of mine who's very involved in, not ESG kinds of things, but really in structurally recreating some of the areas in which there are, erosion from anything from hurricanes to everything, and she does that globally. And Amanda gave her all of these things to read that Mags is talking about. And she is just fascinated with Bitcoin now. And it just thinks that, this is a really great learning curve for her in terms of the global environmental work that she's doing. And we're keeping up with that learning experience. So, in other parts of life, people might come across individuals that are experts in their field. But when you introduce them to Bitcoin and you put together a number of things, and if they're inquisitive people, if they're dogmatic, that they have a dogma that they're not willing to change their mind, so that's just hard in any regard. But I think we definitely have opened her mind and study. She wasn't against. She didn't know much except for what she had been talked to about. But I think we have an advocate now. We will know more.
That's awesome. So this person is someone who has political influence, I guess?
No, she doesn't have political U.S., but she's very respected globally on things to do with not necessarily climate change per se. The impacts of climate change, the reconstruction of territories, in terms of where you put, if there's a hurricane, where you put sand, where companies and individuals would rebuild to what kind of plants to put, etc. And she works throughout the world with governments around. So feeling comfortable about Bitcoin and the positive nature of which, I don't mean to mix metaphors here, but the positive impact it can have on the electrical grid was something she just was not aware about at all. So I think that we've kind of roped her into thinking about it, and maybe she could become an advocate for Bitcoin in both business and political and risk management of climate issues around the world wherever she works.
That's great. Yeah, it's so important to get people who are respected and can influence policy and just thought leaders in the space or adjacent spaces. So important to get them on board, or at least understand Bitcoin at a much deeper level than they do, because there's a lot of knee-jerk reactions.
Yeah, and maybe between like Mags, Amanda, and a few others, we could put together, kind of so that we all don't have to start from the beginning each time. Some reading lists, obviously, the Bitcoin white paper, but we could tailor it also to, you mentioned Lynn Alden, so we could have people that are looking at the economy, the economics, then the economics, the environment, the other, so having them in categories, and a kind of from the beginning ones would be, obviously even the Bitcoin white paper maybe a little more technical, but it's pretty easy for most people. And you could just, the first couple of readings would build upon the second ones, and then the third ones, you wouldn't want to start with the last one first. And then each one of those categories, that would be very helpful. That way people don't have to start from square one all the time, and it would go across all these different spectrums.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense.
And we could use that for the staffs of different politicians. We could circle around with some of them. The Chris Lambs, who works with Senator Loomis, and we could find out from him what are things that she might think would have been good for her fellow senators to have looked at, and then that would be easy. So easier in that way. It comes with some kind of, we feel comfortable that those various senators and representatives, their staffs would, be comfortable with this progression of learning.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
We actually this weekend had a call with Aureka Rose. She's running against Brad Sherman, and she's been growing kind of, her learning, and she's practically trying to do it on her own, to make sure she understands Bitcoin. But I think you're right. We have to, make sure that we can compile a list of resources, but it's also important to, especially like for her, she stands for certain things like financial education. There have to be conversations that are very tailored to a specific politician. One that's much more open and willing to read everything you give them is obviously great. But if there's specific, platforms that they're running on, you do need someone to tailor it a little bit for them. But I am honestly just happy to see some friendlier candidates coming forward, and the Bitcoin, and also like the Bitcoin community supporting them and helping them, whether that's financially or arming them with knowledge.
Excellent. Okay, what else do we have that folks want to talk about?
Hey guys, I have a question. So I saw the pictures from El Salvador. There were lines on the Chivo ATM. Like, do we know the numbers? Like, how many people are using it, or are they buying or selling Bitcoin? Like, what's happening? I guess we don't.
I don't know if, sorry, Aaron, just wait a second. I don't know if Leslie had a question. You had your hand raised for a while.
One quick comment on the El Salvador, just so that everyone answered. There was a podcast today, but with Stefan Laguerre released it from someone that's been on the ground and testing the Chivo wallet. I do know, sort of, I've been interested just because, hey, it's the first rollout of Bitcoin in a country. There obviously have been some issues with the app. Some people experience more challenges than others. They have been pretty quick from what I can see in terms of addressing them. And getting people onboarded and making sure that people actually do get the money that they were supposed to receive. But I think too, they only had 3 months to build a system, so the fact that it's working, I think, is amazing to see. But on the ground stuff, there are some. I think it's a Bitcoin magazine reporter, and again, the podcast that Stefan Laguerre released is a person that's been kind of on the ground. It's a good place to start.
Okay, anyone else? I don't know if Leslie's there. If not, we'll go to Dr. April. Leslie.
Hi, I'm here. I didn't realize I raised my hand. I didn't mean to. But all kinds of questions have been going through my head, so I can ask a question if you want. My question is, what is the difference between the Swan Bitcoin and using exchanges like crypto or Coinbase?
Sure. So, number one, we're Bitcoin only. And number two, I think you get much better service, whether you're a customer or client. Doesn't matter if you're investing $10 a week or...
But do you own your keys?
You can, yes. We make withdrawals automatic if you want, so that you control your own private keys. Automatically withdraw Bitcoin to your address. Or you can do it manually, and the withdrawals are 100% free. The only way we make money is when you buy or sell Bitcoin, and it's basically about 1%, plus or minus, depending on how much you're investing, but usually about 1%.
Okay, so is this room specifically for Swan Bitcoin people, or?
No, I work there, so I'm one of the 4 admins. Like, if you click on the Bitcoin Club, this is how you can tell that I'm not lying. If you go down to who the admins are, Alex Thorne is head of research at Galaxy Digital. Nick Carter's a general partner at Castle Island Ventures, very respected writer. And Keith Sidhu is at Fidelity. I guess he doesn't list his bio anymore, but yeah, he works at Fidelity.
Terrence, not to step on your toes, but just as someone who has no affiliation with Swan at all, I personally have used many different exchanges, and for me, it's been the easiest, especially when it comes to customer service. And again, just to repeat, like I genuinely have no affiliation with Swan at all, but I'm personally a huge fan because I'm able to, kind of like Terrence was saying, I'm able to set these auto withdrawals up. So I DCA, right? I dollar cost average in. I buy, same amount, whether it's daily, weekly, and once it hits a certain amount and accumulates, I can have it sent directly to a public address, right? To a wallet, right? So immediately moves out of there. I love the speed at which Prime Trust operates as well, which is where that's held ultimately. They're kind of the intermediary of sorts. But in terms of like confirming things, in terms of hearing back from support, it's immediate, and that's just something you're going to get with a smaller, and I'll add as well, something I personally like, Bitcoin only exchange, we'll call it. Because with like a Coinbase or anybody else, like I'm never going to hear from anybody, and I'm dealing with all the other BS when like price goes up and down really crazy. It's like shutting down. I can't even get into it. So there's all these issues, and it's just really, it's genuinely, I'll kind of leave it with that, but it's just one of the best services that I've received in terms of hearing back from people right away, any kind of support, guidance on these things, and it's just streamlined Bitcoin. There's no other BS of all these other coins and things like that. So personally, huge fan, recommend checking them out, and it's very, very great.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Hopefully you didn't mind my jumping in, Terrence. I've had issues with other exchanges, like so.
Oh no, that's all.
Great. When I find one I like, I want to let other people know. Like it's people recommend it for a reason, right? It's not shilling. I don't know of anyone else who works for the company or has any affiliation.
I guess Neil does a little bit.
Okay, sorry. Go ahead. I didn't mean to.
Yeah, I think Neil Jacobs is part-time with Swan, I think, and then Corey was in the room earlier. I think the other Swan employees are too busy with work and tweeting. This is part of my work, but it's also fun for me. And I was doing this before I joined Swan, running the Bitcoin Club, or helping run it, assisting G and Alex. And they've been busy lately. I think Alex works a lot. And Gita. Dr. April, welcome. I don't know if you had a question or comment.
Oh, good evening, everybody. Actually, I wanted to give a shout out to my friend Lord Fasitsua. Hey, congratulations, my friend, on your node.
Thank
Good to see you again.
And
I'm excited for you. If I could put you on the spot a little bit, what do you make as a member of your parliament? What do you make about everything that's happening here in the U.S. with the SEC and Gary Gensler, and how do you view that? And then and then if I may, and you don't have to answer this, but have you had interactions with the U.S. now that you are starting to set up this node to do these transactions? Like, is there any response?
Hi, April. Sure, no worries. I don't mind being put on the spot. It's really good to see you again, and thank you for the constant support. Yeah, it's been very interesting to observe, obviously, because the US is the premier nation when it comes to Bitcoin. It was invented there. Its greatest proponents have come from there. It's not numerically or per capita the largest purchaser of Bitcoin anymore, but it is still propels it to a large extent. So its regulatory scheme obviously is the one to watch. You would think, definitely if you're in a G7 or G20 nation. So the fact that the SEC doesn't seem to think it's a security, so it seems to feel it's more of a commodity. Obviously, the CFTC sees it as a commodity. The IRS seems to classify it as property, so an asset that accrues capital gains tax. And for us in the international anti-corruption regulatory bodies, it's treated as money. That's why we KYC AML people, so we can track the origin and destination of funds. My general feeling is, I may be wrong completely, but it looks, I would hope that it's headed towards being a commodity, because I think on balance that'd be the best for retail and for institutional buyers, and ultimately for nation states, but mostly for retail. The man on the street buying Bitcoin is the entity for whom I feel most strongly as an advocate for, apart from emerging markets, of course, and that would make it easier for the man on the street. That would be my regulatory model suggestion for us. We had a bill on cryptocurrency in general introduced in 2019, which I was able to garner enough votes to have struck down or struck out. It had effectively, in one section, it basically stated cryptocurrency shall be monitored, regulated, enforced upon, everything by our National Reserve Bank, which is our central bank, which kind of makes the whole thing pointless. It makes the owner of a liquor store in charge of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's completely counterintuitive. So that was struck out. So we don't have, the only incoming legislation would be the bill that I didn't draft, but that I amended from the El Salvadorian model to be introduced when our House rises again. So I'm hoping that that's the resolution it'll come to. Gary Gensler's statements and non-statements have been just as important. That seems to indicate that Bitcoin is the only cryptocurrency recognized as a store of value. Initially, it seemed everything else would be a non-compliant security. It seems Ethereum might be getting a pass. From my reading, I may be wrong, but that's what it seems to be. If that's the case, then that's along the lines of the model that we would adopt. As far as contact, yes, I can't lie. I've had contact with my senatorial and congressional colleagues in the US, who are both professional colleagues and some who are also friends who I know socially apart from the job. And what I've just said is also the indication I'm getting from them. One of the interesting things I found is that there seems to be a lot more support from 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue than you would think for Bitcoin in particular. It seems to me anyway that there have been a lot of very, very clever people who've been thinking about this in some depth for a little while now, and they seem to be advising the right people in the right direction, even though that may not be indicated by the public statements of any three-letter agencies at the moment. But and if not proponents of Bitcoin, at least have a sensible and rational view about its importance and its uniqueness as an asset, and in establishing an entirely new asset class. Anecdotally, which Goldman Sachs, for example, did with that well-known interview with Matthew McDermott, the head of Global Digital, who said that he viewed it as a privilege to witness the emergence of a entirely new asset class, and he was speaking only about Bitcoin. So I think the recognition of that fact is not lost upon regulators, and not just regulators, but the politicians who instruct them. So I'm encouraged. I'm extremely encouraged by the state in the US, although recently on the surface it may seem less encouraging. My information, of course, I can't be completely candid about my talks professionally, socially and otherwise with my American colleagues, but I'm encouraged by what's going on behind the scenes. So yeah, I hope that sheds a bit of light on it.
Thank you, Lord. That's what I was hoping to hear.
Yeah, that was great. Thanks for asking that.
Yeah.
How about Alma? You've been waiting a while.
Yes, I'm here. I'm enjoying Yes, I'm enjoying the conversation, and I'm actually concerned about Salvador, and that's what I have a question about it. So until now, things seems to be going in the right direction by the government, working on the glitches and on the access to the infrastructure of the machines and all of that. But the opposition is doing a very good campaign of defamation and really making the optics being really difficult for the government. And so I am concerned about other things that are coming up to light in the grounds. For example, some of the people that I know has been texting me and telling me that they're really concerned